Welcome back to Real Film Chronicles. As always, I'm Nathan.
I'm Brian.
And today, we're going to be talking about Matrix Resurrections.
Ooh. Matrix Resurrections. Number 4. A long in the working... Do you think this movie was long in the making to get number 4?
Well, it was... I think it was like, what, 19 years? 18 years since the
2003.
Yeah, so it was 18 years since the Matrix... Revolutions, which is the third one in the trilogy, the original trilogy. But I think looking at some of the interviews with Lana Wachowski, that Warner Brothers was in talks in recent years to go ahead with a fourth Matrix movie with or without her, or with or without her and her sister, rather, because Lana and Lily were the original directors of the groundbreaking, dare I say groundbreaking, Matrix trilogy.
You dare say it, and you're 100% accurate. I mean, at the very least, the first movie, a cultural shift, the impact is immeasurable. The second two movies, I don't know. I mean, take it or leave it. They were pretty, I'm not trying to like poo-poo on these sequels here, but they definitely did not have the same impact for me, at least. But you know what? It's still a fun trilogy to watch as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, something that profitable, I know that like you said, like the first Matrix movie still had a huge cultural impact, had a huge impact on filmmaking as a whole. There are still movies out there who are in some form or another either inspired by or directly imitating action scenes from the Matrix and how they were filmed. Like you could see there's a huge shift in just how action scenes were filmed, because they took a lot of influence from, I think, Asian movies and that kind of
the wire work and the martial
wire
arts
work and
slow motion.
Yeah, all that stuff. And they really brought it. I don't think that Western movies and Hollywood movies had really played with that style of action before. So, but bringing that kind of cliche, bringing the East and West together and kind of meshing those in that new fusion was hugely inspirational, to say nothing of the actual narrative itself. I think right now, if you talk to people about like, taking the red pill or taking the blue pill, people know what that means. And
everyone knows it.
Yeah. And then like just the whole look of the Matrix, like the whole leather look, the sunglasses. I still to this day, when I go buy sunglasses, my measure is like, will these sunglasses make me look like I'm in the Matrix?
I just wish we had cell phones in modern day as cool as the cell phones they had in the original Matrix series.
Absolutely. I actually rewatched, sort of in prep for watching Resurrections, but sort of, I was also sharing these movies with my son. Being able to share these with the new generation is kind of neat. Going back and really just loving this whole trilogy. I know, like you said, the second and third ones, that is Matrix Reloaded and Matrix Revolutions, were met with mixed reviews. They did really well at the box office, which is why Warner Brothers wanted to make a fourth one, because they're not going to sit on any property, not just them, but any studio is going to, of course, look for ways to make money, and popular known brand recognition is going to pique their interest sooner or later.
Well, it's kind of surprising that they would wait even this long for a fourth one, because those, all three of them were huge at the box office. The second one was the biggest movie of the trilogy, but even the third one was making a lot of cash.
Going back and rewatching these, I had a blast with all three, and I think my ratings for 2 and 3 went up. I think it's one of those movie series where, with the Matrix and with the Matrix Resurrections as well, it's been very divisive in terms of its reviews. And I think with the Matrix series, you either take the ticket and you're on board for the ride, or you're not. Right. So like you're either invested in this and you're along and you want to see what's going on, or you're just like, what is going on? This is all ridiculous and over the top and nonsensical. For me, when I was watching this, I was 100% back invested in the story. The second and third one, I gained a new appreciation going back and watching those movies with new eyes. I don't think I've watched them in a couple of years now, but just like really appreciating things like the action sequences, which man, was such a breath of fresh air after, like, you look at today's modern action sequences and so much quick cuts and shaky cam, or the camera moving all around, and just see such competently directed, not competently directed, but like competent. It sounds like such a low bar to clear, but just like such like visually clear action scenes, innovative action scenes. Like in the second movie in Reloaded, there's that action scene in the lobby of the Merovingians place where
Love it.
where Neo is fighting off all these guys with the weapons. First he stops the bullets, and then they come after him with like the swords and spears and axes, and like
Yeah.
I forgot how good that fight was. And of course, like the highway chase scene in the second one.
There's like a solid 45 minutes because it goes from that fight scene in the lobby right into the highway scene. You're like, this is, I mean, it was mind blowing at the time. It was so much fun, and it's still a ton of fun to go back to and watch again right now.
And honestly, watching these movies now, it feels like Revolutions, or rather Reloaded and Revolutions, felt like essentially two parts of the same movie. So it really feels like almost like Resurrections is like closing off this trilogy to me in a sense. So you got the original Matrix, and then Reloaded and Revolutions almost fit kind of together. I think they were released in the same year, actually. I think they were both released in 2003, weren't they?
They were. I think there was about 6 or 7 months between them.
Which is like an insane thing to think about now in the current landscape of how movies are made.
Well, it was back then. I mean, you're talking about a time when Lord of the Rings were coming out, and they were all filmed, you know, back to back to back, like at the same time. And then they do the same thing with the 2 Matrix sequels. It's like this was a shift in how movies were made. All of a sudden, it's like we're very aware of that. We're definitely making sequels. These movies will do well, and you know what? We'll just save resources and film them at the same time, which is pretty wild.
Yeah, which I don't think has been really done on that magnitude since, except for now the Avatar sequels coming out with James Cameron, which we're still waiting for those. But I think he filmed 2 or 3 movies essentially back to back.
Yeah, and I think the MCU stuff is filmed in such a way, like what was that interview with Gwyneth Paltrow, who didn't know she was in the one of the Spider-Man movies, and it's because she was just filming little bits of Endgame and Infinity War and Spider-Man. It's just like the actors are so confused on which movies they're actually in. Yeah,
but I don't think they actually filmed, even like Infinity War and Endgame, they didn't film them back to back. Those were completely, I think, separate shoots in different years. So like that model of filmmaking just doesn't happen anymore. So like the first Matrix was groundbreaking for special effects, for its narrative, for its examination of, you know, what is real. That was the great thing about the Matrix movies, was that you had that blend of incredible action, but you also had all these different examinations of different philosophical things, like the nature of choice, the nature of identity, the nature of reality, and going in. Some people did not buy into that. I love going back now, that scene with the architect in the second one.
Yeah.
I love that scene actually now, going back and seeing what they were actually saying and what they were actually going for. It works on so many levels where we find out years later where Lana and Lily were actually building the Matrix as a metaphor for the transgender experience, right? So that whole idea of, you know, your true self, like shifting that identity, and even like the idea of like dead names and like your true name and that kind of thing was kind of baked into the Matrix. So like it can be read on so many different levels in so many different ways, which actually, without getting too far ahead of ourselves, Matrix Resurrections actually pokes fun at this a little bit in the movie itself.
Man, yeah, I don't know if we want to start talking about the Resurrections right now. Like, I'll start off with the standard question of, well, first, the statement that I'm willing to go full spoilers right from the beginning here for any listeners who haven't seen it by now. I can't imagine if you're listening, you haven't checked the movie out. But I want to know, how excited were you for the 4th entry? Like this movie was supposed to come out, I think, in 2020, and it got pushed back because of the pandemic. Like, were you excited throughout that entire time? Were you looking forward to this movie? Did you want to jump back into the Matrix?
So when I first heard about it, I think, of course, as any fan will tell you now, like whenever you hear about like a 20 or 30 year later sequel, there's going to be some trepidation about whether you can, you know, A, make a good movie in general, and B, make a good movie that's going to be kind of true to the originals and feel like it fits in with the originals. So when I first heard they were making, for real this time, it wasn't just rumors, they were actually making a 4th Matrix movie, I was not on board at all in any way, shape, or form. And then
that's pretty fair.
The first movie trailer dropped, and I have to give props to the team, the advertising team, because that movie trailer completely sold me.
Yeah, it was pretty wicked.
Set to the music. Oh, was it Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit?
Yeah.
But that trailer, from the first trailer, I was really surprised. I was actually excited and really looking forward to this fourth film. And not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I was on the train. I bought the ticket. I took the ride. I love this movie. I was not disappointed.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. And they brought back Keanu and Carrie-Anne. And as soon as I see that they're back, I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe there is some legitimacy to this. And Lana is back, but the duo is not. Like, she's doing it on her own now, and she doesn't have Lily with her. And it's like, should I be hesitant? Should that be a red flag? I didn't really care either way. I was playing it pretty chill. I enjoy the Matrix trilogy. I don't think we need to go back to it at this point. But if the three of them are back like that, maybe there is something more to say about this world. And honestly, I think there's a lot of good stories that can come out of this world, like the Matrix world, that don't necessarily revolve around Neo and Trinity and whatnot. But obviously with Keanu and Carrie-Anne back, we're going to be focusing on them, and I want to see what they've got baked up for us.
Well, it was one of those weird kind of perfect storm situations where Warner Brothers was on the tear. They were going to make this movie regardless. This is what Lana's been saying in interviews. And then Lana said, it's like, well, you're going to make the movie regardless. And then she'd gone through, she'd lost her parents recently. And so she'd viewed this movie as a way to kind of deal with this grief by surrounding herself with people that she knew and loved and that knew her parents. And being able to tell the story, essentially, I can't remember, I was trying to track down, there was another quote from an interview where it's like, yeah, I can go back and kind of give these characters kind of a happy ending, and it's this emotional catharsis for me personally dealing with this grief. And I'm like, that's really cool. It's like you're taking that personal inspiration and you're kind of, you're processing that human experience through this artistic expression. And to me, there was something so kind of personal and something so humanizing about that approach to filmmaking. Yeah, it biased me more in favor of the film, honestly, because it's like,
honestly, just hearing that, I mean, provides some more context to it, and I can appreciate why this movie exists. I mean, it has some statements to say during the film, which validates its existence. But hearing that extra context outside, like in our real world, gives it a little more levity, I think. That's great.
Yeah.
Can we go over just the general plot, and then maybe we just talk about some moments, what we liked, what we didn't like about the movie? Like, we have Neo and Trinity sort of back, but they're in a new iteration of the Matrix, and they are their old selves. Like, Neo is Thomas Anderson.
Well, what is the Matrix, Brian?
You know what? I can't handle it. So, like, in this one, the whole movie, the whole beginning of the movie is kind of this weird situation where, we have Thomas Anderson, Keanu, essentially making the Matrix trilogy as a video game series in this movie world, right? And it's that first point there where he's in talking with his producer or something, and they're saying specifically Warner Brothers is our studio, and they're going to force us to make a fourth Matrix, whether we're on board or not. And it was so meta that I'm not sure I could get over that for the rest of the film. It's like, that line, like, it's so pointed, saying this movie only exists because they were going to make it with or without the Wachowskis.
Yeah.
And I think with that, the studio was probably forcing, well, I shouldn't say forcing, but, probably indicating that they won't make a fourth one if Keanu and Carrie-Anne don't come back on, or they're going to make one. I don't know. It gets messy on what could or couldn't be, but that's kind of where we're at. And it follows the first movie very similarly for a little bit, right? You want to give us a little plot rundown of this film?
Yeah, essentially you have, so the bigger picture carrying on from the Matrix, the original Matrix is like human beings in the future are being used essentially as a power supply for our machine overlords. And the Matrix is this computer generated simulation that keeps the population docile and keeps us all complacent so that they can harvest our bodies for raw energy. After the events of the original trilogy, Neo brokered a kind of a peace treaty with the machines so that people who wanted to stay in the Matrix could stay and people who wanted to leave could leave. And then the seemingly Neo and Trinity, who were kind of the main characters of the first trilogy, apparently died, but they're being resurrected for this movie. So there's a new iteration of the Matrix. Neo and Trinity are back in it as Thomas Anderson and Tiffany.
Tiffany, yes, that's right.
And they don't know who they are. They don't recognize each other either. And they're going about their daily lives, sensing that something's not quite right. But essentially, it's a new iteration of the Matrix that's designed to be even more kind of subtle and manipulate people into harvesting even more energy. Because Neo and Trinity, by keeping them close together but never letting them actually hook up and consummate their love, that there's this tension that's formed that has a ripple effect of the rest of the Matrix that creates more energy. But eventually Neo is freed from the Matrix and they go on a mission to try and free Trinity. Yeah, it's a reboot / sequel it's really aware of being a reboot / sequel. So they're fighting against the programs who want to keep everybody docile and keep them in conflict, because apparently conflict creates them more energy. And then you have people who are trying to free people's minds and show them the truth. So that kind of feeds through it. It's so like you're saying, like you're either on board or you're not. Like it's either it's so meta. Like I heard you like meta with your meta, so I got you some meta for your meta, right? It's just like that meme.
It's almost ridiculous, yeah.
But to the point, like it goes to the point of absurdity, but then comes back around to being meaningful again. I think I would compare it in a way to, I don't know if people out there have seen the Jay and Silent Bob reboot movie by Kevin Smith. It's a sequel and a reboot at the same time, like a really effective sequel / reboot, while at the same time being critical of sequels / reboots. Yeah. And Matrix Resurrections is that same self-awareness. It's easily the funniest of all the Matrix movies. Like the first three Matrix movies were very, very serious in tone, and this one has some very pointed humor, some satire. There's some actually really, really funny stuff going on. Yeah, it's for me, it's in that category. It's being critical of sequels and reboots, while also at the time being an example of how to do a sequel / reboot properly and do it really well and have it mesh with the originals. Yeah. So it's that weird kind of paradox that they're in. It's really neat.
The movie couldn't be any more aware of itself and winking at you with both eyes than it does in this movie. It's so wild. It almost kind of put me off at the beginning of like just how much the movie was speaking to me about what it was. But I gotta say, like the overall story, basically that's just it. It's just Neo gets out of the Matrix, and I like that him and Trinity have this like eternal bond, even though they're in a different Matrix simulation. They have to get paired back up together, and they're basically willing, like Neo's willing to drop everything, just go all in, and that's what happens. Like they have to go back in and reunite these two. That's basically the long and short of it right there, right?
Yeah, and he even goes so far as to be like, oh, like if Trinity chooses to stay in the Matrix, I'll get plugged back in myself.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things, right, where it's in this case you don't have the architect, you have the analyst played by Neil Patrick Harris.
Yep.
Who is, all the new additions to this are great, by the way. I love Neil Patrick Harris anyway, but having him in there is like the main bad guy from the machine's perspective, and he explains all this stuff, and he explains I don't know if you want to get into this whole part of it now. I don't know.
Talk about it. Yeah, man. Throw it all out there.
The whole thing is like Neo's in the Matrix again, and he's taking this medication in the form of blue pills, obviously.
Yeah.
For those people who aren't aware, in the first Matrix, Neo's given a choice between accepting current reality and going back to sleep, so to speak, and taking the blue pill or taking the red pill and seeing just how deep the rabbit hole goes. That is like understanding the truth about the reality he's in. So taking the red pill represents this willingness to learn about the truth about the world and about yourself. The backstory for his character is that, Thomas Anderson, he's having depression. He's having this break with reality. He's attempted suicide before, according to what's going on in the movie. And so he's going to see his psychiatrist. So he's on this medication with these blue pills. but he feels that something's off. And for me, it kept switching between like the first half of this movie where Neo's stuck in these loops. I was really questioning reality myself. Is like, is he like, it was just the way things were shot, and he was doing something, and then he'd look up and he was in the analyst's office. Like, what happened to that missing time between? Like, it was kind of playing with people's minds a bit. Like watching this, I wasn't sure what was real or not. It was really well done.
And I think the analyst kind of explains that it's just like the most effective way of using Neo in the Matrix was having him borderline kind of figuring out that he's there and he's not there. Like he's riding that line so much, and it's just like, is he delusional? Was the Matrix real? And the whole meta thing of him, Neo, being responsible for writing the original Matrix, like the video game. So it's like, of course, he's falling in love with his own creation. That was a massive success, and he just can't stop thinking about it, to the point where, are we in the Matrix? So he's asking himself, am I in the Matrix? Did I write about what's really real? And I love that it's just a direct call out to everyone. Anyone right now can talk about, are we in the Matrix or a Matrix? It's like, this is one conversation thread that never stops since this movie, and is really like ingrained in our popular culture. It's just like, it's fun to talk about and theorize about it. And it's the same thing this guy is suffering from, but he's having that actual delusion. And I love that the analyst is like playing that hard, giving him the blue pills. And that means Thomas Anderson, Neo, would have written the blue pills into the original Matrix video game, which we experienced in the movie. And I also loved that scenes from the video game, scenes were actually scenes from the movies playing numerous times in this actual movie, right? And it's just like, as he goes further in, he just keeps seeing like either hallucinating or, literally projected onto the wall, like scenes of Morpheus sitting in that red chair offering the red, blue, and blue pill. And he's just like, well, these are scenes from my video games. Like, no, that actually happened. He's just like, well, that's a mind job right there. Yeah,
it's pretty crazy. I love too, like when his boss comes to him, I can't remember the actor's name. He was in Mindhunter. He was also the voice of Hans in Frozen.
Jonathan Groff?
Jonathan Groff, yes. He's great. He's like essentially he's the co-owner of this company with Neo, or sorry, he's Mr. Anderson at this point, Thomas Anderson. And when he comes in, it's like, oh yeah, like our company's actually we're a subsidiary of Warner Brothers, so they're gonna make this fourth game without us. So like a whole bit of meta commentary on Lana's part. But then when they're sitting down to brainstorm ideas for the fourth movie, or for the fourth video game rather, in there, and they had that focus group. And did you notice that Christina Ricci was in there?
Yes. Oh, yes.
I didn't notice that. I looked it up afterwards. I was like, oh my goodness, that was Christina Ricci is that person who's giving them like the market research there.
Previous collaborator with the Wachowskis at Speed Racing.
Yes, of course. But they kept talking. I love how I think Lana was specifically speaking about something about the anxiety of influence, where she's aware of like the Matrix's, cultural impact that it's had. So when they keep talking about, I was like, we need to make this new one groundbreaking. We need a new bullet time. Yeah. We need all this stuff. And it's like, she's kind of making this meta commentary about like the pressure that she's under as a filmmaker. Is like, oh, I made this movie that's considered groundbreaking, that had this huge cultural impact, and people expect that every time, as opposed to like, well, why can't I just make a good movie, that I put my heart and soul into, that I'm passionate about, in this case, to help me deal with the grief of losing my parents. Why does it have to be groundbreaking? Why do we need a new bullet time, right? It's like, we have that pressure on yourself, and you have that external pressure. So seeing that other kind of meta commentary, and just seeing how ridiculous some of those boardroom meetings can get about like, oh, how do we innovate? How do we make this the next best thing? What's going to be the next bullet time? And it's just like one of those weird kind of meta moments, but also speaks, if you've ever been in like a boardroom meeting in a corporate environment, that's the kind of ridiculous discussions you end up having.
Do you think a lot of people would be disappointed in this movie for not being like the literal next best thing? Like this movie is fairly layered with some of that commentary that you're touching on. Do you think there's some disappointment there?
Well, I think, 100%, because people are expecting you think of the first movie, and there's that iconic scenes of, you know, when Neo uses bullet time for the first time, where he's on the roof and he's bending backwards as the bullets are flying over him, or that whole lobby scene where he and Trinity take out all the security guards, or like his ending fight there with Smith and the subway system, all this, or Trinity's the first shot of the movie there where Trinity does her jump kick there and the camera pans around her, all these iconic scenes. And of course, people are going to be like, oh, well, why can't you just like, you know, change the entire course of cinema again with your next movie? Right. Just like, this is probably like a once in a career kind of defining moment.
I was going to say, I think there's some parallel there to M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah.
And him being known for the twist ending. And Wachowski's here making groundbreaking cinema. They know they can't necessarily recreate a groundbreaking thing that's going to just disrupt, you know, popular movie culture and stuff. It's just like they approach the movie completely different. Something M. Night doesn't necessarily do. He just kind of keeps sticking with what he likes to do in a movie, where here we get such a pointed commentary on the movie's influence in popular culture. It's so trippy.
Yeah, and I think this movie does fall victim to, I think a lot of movies fall victim to that, where people have these specific expectations, especially if you are somebody like the Wachowskis who have done amazing things before, and people are expecting, well, why can't you just make game-changing, groundbreaking cinema that has a huge cultural influence every year with every movie you make? And it's like, dude, no. It's like I can make this movie, and it feels like almost like a catharsis for Lana to like kind of dispel this kind of pressure that she's felt, or probably that Lily and Lana both felt about like, you need to make the next Matrix. It's like, no, like we're going to do what we're going to do. If it becomes like a cultural touchstone like the Matrix, fine. But like, that's an insane amount of pressure to put on people. I'm sure that in corporate boardroom discussions, those exact phrases have been uttered around. It's like, well, we need something groundbreaking, or what's going to be the next bullet time. Those sound too trite and too jaded to have been made up, right? Those got to be paraphrased from meetings that they've had with Warner Brothers or other studios, right?
100%. Yeah, it's just, without a doubt. But I love that Lana and Lily can make these movies, and they were given an opportunity to make this movie in as weird as it is, like with their own personal touches, and it doesn't fall victim to, you know, I hate to keep bringing up the MCU, but it's like all of the MCU movies feel like they're just the same kind of movie, regardless of who is directing them. And Wachowski's here saying, we will not do a movie if we don't have our personal touches on it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that can kind of play a negative part on their career, where you don't see them directing stuff all the time. They don't get handed a lot of projects, but when they do get a project, you know it's going to be unique. It's going to have a bunch of unique voices to it. It's going to be layered. It's going to be a different cinema experience. And I think that is really fantastic.
Yeah. And I think I had to temper my expectations too going into this, because I was like, oh, I'm expecting like the next big thing visual. It's like, no, I had to like set all that aside and go in kind of with a clean slate and not fall into that trap, and just like, let's see what they're trying to sell me. Am I going to buy what they're selling me, regardless of what they've sold me in the past? And so I think going into it with that kind of mindset, you can't let those past expectations, you know, influence the current interpretation, or you have to like kind of mitigate that to a certain extent. Cause like, this is not going to be, you know, game changing in the same way that the first Matrix movie is, but there are so few movies that are that game changing. You can't just replicate that on a whim,
You can't
right?
plan to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I think that's it. You can't plan to do a game-changing movie. Those movies come along because they just hit all the right points at the right time with the right people involved. One of the questions I wanted to ask was if you thought this was a money grab, and I think we kind of established this earlier, that, the commentary was the same, that Warner Brothers was going to make another Matrix movie regardless. But I certainly wouldn't label anyone in this movie as kind of like selling out of just, it wasn't like Lana was hard up for cash and just wanted to revisit the Matrix for a paycheck, right? It's like, well, she had something to say.
That was the thing. It was like Warner Brothers, she said Warner Brothers was going to do it anyway. They literally said that in the movie. And she said, and then she happened to be in the right spot to want to do the movie. So like, if you're going to do it anyway, like I might as well then do it because I have something that I want to say. I have something that I need to discuss right now. Part of it is because I think she mentions that, Neo and Trinity are kind of like the most important characters to her. And so kind of have them back and give them that happy ending is a sense of catharsis when she's at a darker place in her life. But you look at the other commentary too, right? So you look at the commentary of, obviously in the terms of like she and her sister are both transgender. And so from the LGBTQ point of view of like you have the male character and the female character, you have Neo and Trinity who are kind of being essentially kept apart. And that tension is being used to power society as opposed to being able to allow the male and female essentially to, become one and to unify and become self-fulfilled. So there's obviously kind of that kind of commentary going on. There's still, of course, the idea of discovering your true identity and discovering who you are. But then you also look at the whole point of what the analyst is saying, right? Is like creating conflict and generating conflict in the population somehow increases neural activity, but increases power generation. So you look at a commentary, obviously, on what we're seeing today in the media cycle, what people are terming fake news, where you have, media sources like, not media sources, but people like Breitbart and like alt-right groups just stirring up all this hate, posing as media outlets. But there's like the meta commentary on that as well, where it's like, oh yeah, our society is essentially, the Matrix is feeding off of all those negative emotions and that negative output the same way that, certain segments of our society are feeding off that negative output and those negative emotions. You look at all the conspiracy theorists kind of stuff. You look at Alex Jones and stirring up that negative sentiment, but then they make money off of that in the end, right? So like there's a power generated from those negative sentiments and keeping people at each other's throats. That they're commenting on this movie too. So like there's a lot more, there's so many layers of depth going on here. It's really, really interesting. It's definitely a very modern movie that's definitely speaking to the 2021 world.
Well, and I think that's really well said, really valid in that this iteration of the Matrix is basically the past 20 years of our real world. All this stuff is power generation for these robots, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty grim. And it's like in 1999, the world was a very different place. And, post 9/11, 2003 is when the Matrix movies kind of wrapped up in their trilogy there. Our world has changed drastically. And so would the Matrix. They almost lined up to a point where, our fake world in the Matrix is just, it's too close to home with what we got right now.
Yeah. So there was definitely some socio-political commentary, as one would expect from the Matrix. There's also a lot of philosophical stuff about the analyst is talking about how essentially creating chaos and creating all this makes people want that security blanket even more. So again, it's just going into that kind of social aspect. It was like, oh, and you see people on their cell phones all the time, right? In this movie as well, where like Neo looks up at one point.
Yes.
I think he's in an elevator or he's in someplace, but there's like a glass floor above him. He looks up and like everybody around him is on their phone. Yeah. Obviously a not so subtle nod to our addiction to technology. And I find myself, in moments of boredom or just sitting on the couch after work and I've got my cell phone in my hand staring at it. They're always talking about the Matrix as being a metaphor for like real world systems of control.
Yeah.
And it's interesting in this one, there are agents in this one, right? But you look at the first Matrix movies, and the bad guys were all agents, right? So the bad guy was essentially proxies for the government, right? So you had the government proxies. But in this one, what they do when they want to try and really stop the good guys from doing stuff, what they'll do is they'll take over essentially, what is it called? Was it hive mind or something? But essentially they'll hijack the minds of a bunch of nearby actual peoples.
Oh, yes.
People. They'll hijack the minds of a bunch of nearby people and have them essentially swarm. Oh, it's called a swarm.
Yeah.
They'll actually swarm almost zombie-like against them. So like the enemies this time are represented by government agents, but they're represented by kind of the mindless hordes around people who've been brainwashed essentially. In the Matrix, it's by the machines, but the real world analogy would be, like for example, all the anti-vax movement and that kind of thing, right? So I think there was that kind of commentary around as well, where like the Matrix is essentially doing what some of the media outlets and governments are doing now, where they're stirring up unrest among the population. getting those conspiracy theories out in order to manipulate people so that your enemy, the enemy you think you see in front of you, is your fellow citizen.
Yeah.
As opposed to the real enemy, who is the people who are really stirring up that conflict to begin with, right? So it's this really kind of complex change in how they're presenting the bad guys, as opposed to like not just government agents, but the people around you
really interesting.
Who are being kind of part of that quote unquote swarm, which isn't a flattering metaphor for some people, but
it's pretty accurate. I never really thought about it this way, because it's that social media swarm where if you post something online that, you know, some people don't agree with, the outspoken minority can really take charge. And then all of a sudden everyone is attacking this person who they don't know, and they don't really know why they're doing it. It's just, it's Neo and Trinity driving down the street on a motorcycle, and everyone is trying to kill them for no other reason than they're just driving down the street on a motorcycle.
Yeah, they don't even know why they're doing what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
So it speaks to that, and I'm sure like we're guilty of the same things, of going online and going to echo chambers and looking up things that validate our own worldviews. Talking about like myself, I know I find myself in that mindset too, where I have to like go outside my comfort zone and do research and look at opinions that go against my own beliefs. And it's a hard thing to do, but I think we're all guilty to some degree. That's one of the dangers of social media that I think Matrix Resurrections is commenting on, of like that kind of group think or that hive mind, having that being hijacked for nefarious purposes, right? Which I think you see that in things like the firing of James Gunn from Disney. This is getting a little bit out there, but like essentially that was, you know, false outrage was brought up by decade-old tweets, and you harness the power of you know, get that outrage going among different people, and you get the swarm targeted on that one person. But essentially they're doing the same thing in Resurrections, right? Where on a very literal level, but you can see that kind of parallel in society today. So it's, this is the thing about Resurrections, is it's working on so many different levels and commenting on, you look at from being a metaphor for the trans experience, to being a metaphor for social media, to being a metaphor for socio-political conflict. There's so much going on in the deeper meaning, you know, below the fact that it's also a really entertaining kind of action movie as well.
Not to change subjects on you here or anything, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on the depiction of the real world in this Matrix Resurrections. Because in the first movies, I mean, you know, Zion is the last city and everyone is struggling to survive. Humanity is united in taking down the machines, right? It's just like, we understand we have to go into the Matrix and pull the right people out. We have to keep making these attacks and remain secret throughout the whole thing. And this one, because they have that treaty that Neo kind of brokered before, they're living in kind of this era of peace, and they're able to expand. I don't think they care as much about the defenses. And I kind of got the sense that they're just happy to leave the Matrix alone and just focus on their city, because at this point, I mean, why take the risk of going into the Matrix and pulling, you know, potential prophets and saviors out when you can have natural birth in the city? You know, the machines are coming after you. You can just grow your society and live as you want to live, right? And again, it's just like, you know, General Niobe there is not going to support them in going back to save one person, regardless of how important that one person, Trinity in this case, is to the whole thing. And I think it's interesting that at the very end, it's like they're not invested in like turning the Matrix off. They're just invested in having control over the Matrix, right? It was almost like Neo and Trinity at their full power have control over the Matrix now. Like they're running the show.
Yeah, sort of. So it was really interesting, not to get too kind of punny, but because we're talking about the Matrix movies as kind of metaphor for the trans experience. But it was really interesting. The real world was very non-binary in terms of how it portrayed the relationship between machines and humans. We had in the human city of Io, which is a reversal of, I think, 0-1, because I think the machine city in the video games was like 0-1, so you had 1-0. So I think in binary that's literally 1 and 2, I think. But you had like machines and humans working together in Io. So there was actually technology that allowed programs from the Matrix to exist in the real world, which was kind of a neat effect. If you're looking for mind-blowing effects, that was pretty neat. And then you had like the Machine City, who was essentially, they had this kind of, it was a piece, but there was this kind of balance of power where because they had Neo and Trinity in there, essentially boosting or amplifying the power supply from the humans left in the Matrix. And then using that other method of like creating that conflict that also boosted the power, that meant that the machines didn't have to enslave more people to be in the Matrix. So they were able to meet their power demands without going back to the old ways of enslaving everybody. And Niobe, that was actually Jada Pinkett Smith in the old age makeup, which was pretty good old age makeup. She did a good job. She always does a good job. I loved her. I was going back and I'm watching her in the original trilogy, and she's great in that. But yeah, I thought it was a really interesting kind of evolution where you're saying at the end as well. And even looking at some of the ships, you look at the ships and it looks like they have like some of the machine tech where like it was always insect-like on the back of their ships.
I almost forgot that, there's like friendly robots living with them now. And it was like they're cute. Like they're adorable or something.
And they make mention of like there was actually a machine war. So after Neo brokered that peace, like there were some machines who wanted to go back to the old ways of enslaving everybody. And so there was wars disharmony among the machines. There's machines and human beings working together. So it was a lot more like non-binary, where like things were not so black and white, not so 1 and 0, but a lot more areas of gray in between. But I think that ending scene where after, I guess we're kind of jumping around here, but like Trinity eventually does rediscover who she is, and she decides to be with Neo, and they free her from the Matrix, and they go to the analyst, and the analyst goes on his rant about how, I think he actually used the term sheeple, doesn't he? Talks about the sheeple always where he wants, they're going to want my comfort. I sow all this discord, and like they want that security blanket and this of that safety of the lies that I'm telling them. And I loved how like Trinity was like essentially like punching him and like kicking his head off and stuff, and it would regrow. So like he could feel the pain. Yeah. But then they were saying it's like, oh yeah, we're actually going to go and I don't think they were going to take control of the Matrix per se, but they were going to go and essentially tell people the truth that they were living in the Matrix, and give them the choice, right? That they could stay there or they could unplug if they wanted to. But essentially taking down that veil of lies and false conflict, and essentially just like telling people like, here's the truth, here are your actual choices. Because this movie, one of the other themes too, the philosophical themes it explores, is this idea of choice, right? And they say at one point, I think they even say like the choice doesn't really matter, right? Yeah. Like the choice is already made kind of for you. What matters is you deciding to go down this path. Because they keep telling people, it's like, oh, you can either wake up and know the truth, or you can go back to sleep and take the blue pill and live your life as a lie. And like, I think Neo says like, well, what kind of choice is that? And it's like, well, no, the choice doesn't really matter. Like you know the choice you're going to make already. What matters is the meaning that you derive from that choice, right? What matters is the choices you make after that, and kind of like, do you embrace that choice? Do you make the best of that? Or do you constantly fighting against that? Do you constantly have that tension where you're, like in this existential state of dread? Or do you like embrace the fact that like, maybe I don't have the same control over my life that I thought I did, but I'm going to still live that full life anyway, right? I'm going to embrace it. Yeah.
And there must be some commentary there where we want to live, like we seem to be going in a direction, with the announcements of the metaverse and virtual reality and all this stuff, that people don't necessarily want to live in the reality. They want to live in the fantasy realm, right? Like give them a different reality that might be better than their real lives. Give those people a choice. And the movie must be saying something about that. When we have so many more opportunities for people just to be online, in social media, in their virtual realities, more so than they are in real life, right? Like you said earlier, everyone's sitting on their phones in the Matrix. Yeah. I mean, obviously that's everyone just living through their phone screens instead of sitting there talking to each other in the elevator.
Well, I think it does speak to that. I think the Matrix movies have always been about, on one level, questioning what is real. Right. Obviously, the first ones were a lot more into that. Well, even this one, like the first half of that movie, first half of Resurrections, it was really playing with my mind. I was like, what is real? Like, what's actually going on? So like the nature of reality and the nature of identity is a huge underlying theme in all these movies. And to question, I think in the first Matrix movie where, what's his face there, the guy who betrays them, he's like, I know the stake
Cypher.
Cypher, yeah. Joe Pantaleone. Of course, I can't believe I blanked on his name. But he's eating the steak. He's about to betray them. He's like, I know the steak isn't real. I love
that moment.
I know that it's just neurotransmitters telling my brain that I'm eating steak. But he's like, but it's so good. I don't even care. It's also like a neat callback in Resurrections where it's like, yeah, I think Cypher's like, yeah, I don't know, just make me a movie star or something in the when you put me back in, or maybe somebody rich and famous, and like they put Neo back in and he's rich and famous. So it's like almost like a neat little callback there.
Well, I love that. Like rewatching the first movie recently with Cypher, it's like, I don't think he's wrong to want to go back in the Matrix. He's wrong for wanting to hurt his friends to make it happen, right?
Yeah.
And I think this movie must have more to say on that, where, you want to give people the choice. Do you want to live in this fake reality where you get all these different luxuries? Or do you want to live in the real world where you're literally eating this generic synthetic slop every day? It's just like some days you just want to have that piece of steak. It's just, everyone should have a choice on what they want to do with their own lives and their bodies, but just don't hurt other people in your decisions, right?
Exactly. So I think that was the point of the ending of The Matrix, right? Or the Matrix Resurrections, because the big climactic scene where Neo goes and tells Trinity the truth, and he's like, the decision's going to be up to her, right? And I'm going to respect her decision either way. So it's like at the end of the movie, they're going to go and tell people the truth, right? It's like, you're living in the Matrix, blah, 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 blah. But the choice is yours. You can continue to live here knowing what you know, or you can ask to be freed and we'll come and free you, right? So like the important thing is that, the choice is yours and we're going to respect that choice either way, but that you're making that choice based on all the facts and based on the truth, so that you're making an accurate and meaningful choice, right?
Yeah.
Even talking about the Matrix Resurrections and all of the stuff that's going on, thematically, that is, to say nothing of the actual performances. You look at, obviously, Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss. I mean, they've only gotten better over time. They perfected their craft. You look at Jessica Henwick coming in as Bugs, great new character. I wish we'd actually gotten a little bit more time to spend with her. I didn't even recognize her. She was in the Daredevil show, and she's completely different here.
Who was she in Daredevil?
Oh no, sorry, Iron Fist. She was in Iron Fist.
Iron
she
Fist.
Was his,
nobody watched Iron Fist.
Still haven't seen season 2, but she was his sidekick there. But she was a martial artist in her own right in that show, and in this one too, she's really good. I can't remember the dude's name who played the new iteration of Morpheus, who again it was really interesting to see all these characters come back as some kind of evolution of themselves, where it was like, it wasn't just Morpheus, it was a program that was based on Morpheus, but was also an agent who's put in like a subset of the video game by Thomas Anderson / Neo as part of a training program. I think they recreate that first scene from the original Matrix, and it's like, oh yeah, I've seen all this already, but I want to see something new. But all this meta commentary, you see Morpheus back, you see Agent Smith is back, reincarnated as was it Josh Groff?
I believe so. Sorry, Jonathan Groff. Jonathan
Groff. Yeah. So Agent Smith is back, which is again great because there was that great interplay or interconnectedness of Neo and Agent Smith. I didn't realize until recently the idea of like Smith was kind of like the anti-Neo, but like because Neo was the one, and then Smith recreated himself, copied himself. He was the many, so it was the exact opposite of Neo. So the one and the many. And I never clued into that before. It's like,
oh
of
my
course,
God,
he is the polar opposite. He's called Neo's called the one. And then what does Smith do? He copies himself, so he's the many, or he's the legion, right? It's like, oh my God, that works like on a literal level even, but it's like, it's a great metaphor. So, but just to show that like Neo and Smith are still interconnected, right? So there's that going on in the background as well. Yeah, there's just so much to love about this movie. If you're a Matrix fan going into this, I think there's so much to love, where it's lovingly calling back and integrating the old and the new mythology together. If you're new, just stepping into the series, taking it with, setting aside any expectations you may have, embracing the meta aspect. Because like, listen, if you don't embrace the fact that this is going to be a meta commentary on both itself.
Yeah.
It's a very self-reflexive movie, so it's commenting on itself, but also commenting on the Matrix movies themselves. So if you're
I'm not sure you can enjoy or even watch this without having watched the original trilogy.
You won't get the full effect.
Yeah.
But it does a good job of summing up the story because there's flashbacks. They literally have scenes from the original movie like playing on big screens at some points in this movie.
Yeah, which is surreal.
But if you're not in for the meta
neat.
narrative, it's like, yeah, I understand 100% why some people hate this movie and why some people said it was a cash grab, or some people said it was like, yeah, it was just ridiculous that they're talking about Warner Brothers, or they actually use the term bullet time in the Matrix movie, or that MILF is now officially a term in the Matrix universe.
Yeah.
All this stuff is like 100%. I understand people who hate this movie, but for me, it was just like coming into this, it was just kind of like, I don't know. It was a love letter to fans too, in a way that wasn't pandering as well. So like, I'm 100% on board with all of the meta commentary, with all of you have the action sequences, and I love too this inversion where I don't think Neo or Trinity pick up a gun or fire a gun in the entire movie. That's
right, eh? I didn't even realize that.
And like they get in a couple of fights, but most of Neo's powers now are defensive, where he's like stopping the bullets, or he's putting up a shield to push people away, or he's redirecting. I think there was a rocket shooting at one point from a helicopter. He redirects it to another rocket. So it's going from that ultra violence to like, let's do it's something completely different, right? It was like, no, we're not going to have them go in and just do the exact same thing over and over again, just shoot up a bunch of bad guys. Like, well, let's see, like his powers evolve now. He doesn't need to be just shooting people constantly. He can use like a more defensive approach. And it's like that, just like little neat touches like that to carry things forward, to like, it's like a reboot or a sequel where you're like taking what you loved about the originals, but then adding something new and putting a different twist on it, right?
Do you think we're going to get more movies after this?
So I was reading interviews by Lana Wachowski, and she said, along with the other producers and writers in the movie, that there are no plans to make this a new trilogy, no plans for other new movies. So if it does go forward, it's going to be Warner Brothers completely ignoring the message of this movie and just cashing in, making new movies.
Like, I won't lie, I wouldn't mind seeing other stories from the Matrix. Like I think we said earlier that there's plenty of storytelling opportunities here, and I'm not sure if you saw any of the Animatrix.
Well, I was going to say, like, the Animatrix is right up your alley then.
Yeah, right? Well, exactly. It's just like, I want to see more of that stuff. Like, there's nice little stories to see here.
I mean, did you ever play, was it Enter the Matrix?
I never played any of the Matrix games, no.
I think Enter the Matrix was the one that was actually had input by Lana and Lily Wachowski. So it was like almost like canonically carrying on the story. And I think I have that sitting on my shelf for my PS2.
That might be worth playing at this point. Maybe it gets a little remaster or something, but I don't remember what story points are in there, but there are some really relevant things in that game.
Yeah.
Where do you end up with the rating on this film?
This was a tough one. I think
it was really difficult to rate, honestly.
Essentially, I'll give you, just to put it in context, the ratings for the original Matrix trilogy, because the original Matrix was obviously a 5-star with the heart on Letterboxd.
Yep, definitely.
Matrix, I think I had Matrix Reloaded. I think my latest viewing was at 4.5, and then Revolutions was at 4. I think I put Resurrections on par with Reloaded for me, so it's a 4 or 4.5 star film for me. But I love the movie. I love that they were able to take that meta commentary and meta context and bake it into the movie in a way that worked for me, understanding that it's not going to work for everybody, and I kind of love that too. I love that they made a movie that it's not for everybody, that people aren't going to love. It's kind of counterintuitive to the way like something like Marvel or Star Wars is made now, where they're kind of making it as broad as possible to kind of optimize profit. It's like, no, they made a movie. It's like, they must know that a bunch of the audience is just going to hate this movie. Yeah. They're just going to hate that aspect of it.
It's not full of fan service like fans are used to being hand delivered anymore.
Yeah. So like, I completely understand the people hate it, but like I said, I'm on board for the ride. I'm picking up what they're putting down. I bought the ticket. I'm taking the ride. I love the Matrix films unabashedly for all the faults, for all the little quirks, for all the criticisms that have been leveled at especially the sequels over the years. I love those films, But like I said before, this really felt like to me, because Revolutions and Reloaded felt like almost two parts of one movie. So this really feels like Resurrections was really the final part of this trilogy overall, where you have like The Matrix, then Reloaded and Revolutions together as one movie, and then Resurrections. And to me, that's a perfect trilogy. It's great. How about you? What did you think?
Yeah, it's one of those things, like when I'm watching Resurrections, I know this was a different film and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It's one of those things where I'm not picking up on all the little details, all the commentary when I'm watching it, but I know something is going on. And I'm on the very surface, literal level, maybe I'm a little disappointed in some of the action, in some of the way things turn out. But I know in the back of my mind, there's something much greater going on here. And I loved that it was a very different approach. I love the meta commentary for the first third of the movie. I just really knew something was up. And then obviously talking with you and getting the greater exposure, because I need to educate myself better after watching the movie and just start leaning into more of the analysis. But I really enjoyed it. I put it at 3.5 stars initially, but I'm really not sure if that deserves to be higher, and maybe subsequent viewings will be higher. So it looks like you gave it 4.5 there.
So it looks like on my Letterboxd rating, I gave it 4.5 plus the heart. Yeah. So that was up there for me with Reloaded. So I love the heck out of this movie. I recommend it to anybody, especially if you're fans of the original Matrix. I still love those movies. Going back and rewatching them, I appreciated them even more. And I'm looking forward to go. I didn't have a chance to rewatch Resurrections before we talked. I'd planned on it because there was so much going on and so much in terms of the dialogue and other little thematic points that we just didn't get a chance to touch on. But there's so much that it takes multiple viewings to really appreciate and really get an understanding. And I'm really looking forward to, watching this over the course of the next decade and seeing how much deeper it gets over time. As looking back at The Matrix now and seeing all these other little themes and little tidbits here and there. And it's I can't believe, as my perspective changes in life and seeing different levels of meaning. And I think that was one of the things in the boardroom scene in Resurrections, where all these different corporate kind of lackeys who were trying to let's, on one sense, it was like a parody of the corporate machine and trying to recreate that magic. But in the one sense, in another sense, it was the Matrix movies, just like any movies, but especially the Matrix movies, which have so much philosophy and so much kind of social commentary baked into them, that they mean so many different things to so many different people. For some people, it's, for Lana and Lily Wachowski, obviously there's a meta narrative about the transgender experience. But then, looking at the social commentary and the political commentary, and it's I think there's a genuine commentary in that scene where they're acknowledging that, we understand that people are going to watch this and they're going to pull different things out of it based on their own life experiences and their own perspective. And there's something really neat about that, where a filmmaker is aware of that and they kind of build that into their filmmaking, where they understand it's I'm going to put this in here and see how people are going to respond to that, as opposed to just in the third act, we're going to have a bunch of stuff blow up. And it's no, we're going to have people talk about this, what this means from a philosophical perspective of truth and identity. And that to me is taking those risks and knowing that some people are going to love it and some people are going to hate it. That to me is artistic expression. That's true filmmaking,
Very well put. Go check out The Matrix Resurrections. Maybe in another 20 years, we'll get The Matrix Retires.
That's amazing. How long were you sitting on that joke?
Just 2 or 3 minutes, maybe. When you were going through all of them, I didn't even piece it together, but they're all start with R's. You said Reloaded, Revolutions, and then Resurrections. I'm damn, they're all R's. What other R titles could they put on this movie?
There's so many layers. Even in the titles themselves, there's layers.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Real Film Chronicles podcast. Thank you for listening and hanging out with us today. We really appreciate your support and look forward to you joining us for the next episode. We can be found around the internet and social media, with our home base being realfilmchronicles.com, which will have all the links you need to follow and keep in touch with us. Until next time, take care of yourself and others, and keep your film journey going.